Hi, and welcome back to the channel. This is the first episode in a podcast series that I'll be producing to properly explain the China-Taiwan conflict. The series will explain the motivations of the two sides and what the ultimate resolution of the conflict will most likely be. This first episode will cover the history of the conflict and explain why China, the People's Republic of China, wants to reunify with Taiwan, which is technically also China, but another alternate dimensional China, a China from the upside down, if you will. Yeah, it's confusing and rarely ever explained in a fact-based, nonpartisan way, which is why I am going to explain it properly for once. Oh, and don't worry, I'm not going to waste your time with irrelevant historical factoids. All the history that I will cover has important implications for the China-Taiwan conflict today. You'll see what I mean as I go on. The first thing you need to know about Taiwan is that despite being a fertile, semi-tropical island just 130 kilometers off the coast of China, the first empire to actually set up a government on the island wasn't Chinese. It was the Dutch. And that fact alone goes a long way to explaining China's weird relationship with the island. You'll see this later on. The Dutch, Portuguese, and Spanish presence on the island was well known to the Chinese Ming Dynasty at the time. In fact, Chinese merchants traded extensively with the European colonists on the island. China, at the time, saw no problem with having a potentially hostile foreign power setting up shop on an island that was just a short hop away from China's richest eastern provinces. It just goes to show what I discussed in my last video about China's geopolitical autism and naivete. And if the Ming Dynasty had gone on forever, then Taiwan today would probably still be a former Dutch colony that gained its independence only after the Second World War, sort of like another Indonesia. But the Ming did not go on forever, and during the course of its fall, a Ming loyalist called Koxinga retreated to Taiwan, defeated the Dutch colonial garrison, and set up a Ming rump state on the island. This sequence of events will become something of a recurring theme for the history of Taiwan, as you will see. Now, calling Koxinga a Ming loyalist is a bit of a stretch since he was actually a pirate lord and very much not part of the Ming imperial court. Nevertheless, the man was a Han Chinese patriot and he didn't want to see his homeland fall to the Manchu barbarians. While Koxinga was alive, the Manchu Qing dynasty didn't make any real effort to take the island. The Manchu were steppe nomads, and they really had no interest in maritime affairs, and were busy with much bigger threats from the continent at the time. It wasn't until 2 decades after Koxinga died that the Manchus found time in their busy schedule to make a play for the island. They assigned a Han Chinese admiral with a modest fleet to engage the Ming Loyalist Navy in 1683 near the island of Penghu, a small island that lies between Taiwan and the mainland. The Ming Loyalist Navy was defeated, and the rest of Taiwan promptly surrendered without a fight. This rapid capitulation after a brief naval battle is something which I think foretells future events, if you catch my drift. Anyway, now that Taiwan was annexed by the Manchus didn't really care for the island at all. Rather than using it as an important springboard for further maritime expansion in the Pacific, the Qing tried their level best to just sort of pretend like the island didn't exist. They essentially put the island under quarantine and didn't allow anyone to emigrate to the island or immigrate from the island into mainland China. It was kind of a escape from New York type situation. Of course, This wasn't because the islanders had a literal virus or anything, but because the Manchus didn't want to risk Ming loyalists spreading any dangerous ideas on the mainland. Now, this might seem like a paranoid stance at first, but it's kind of a repeating theme in Chinese history. Chinese empires often refuse to expand further because they fear that incorporating a distant territory will only create a power base for a future rebellion. This fear is entirely justified because this exact scenario has played out in Chinese history more than once, and always with devastating results. The next big chapter in Taiwan's history came 300 years later in 1895. The Qing Empire, despite having the largest and most modern navy in Asia at the time, suffered a humiliating defeat to the rising Empire of Japan. The Japanese demanded the island of Qingdao, yes, where the beer comes from, as a concession, but the Chinese pushed back and offered the far less valuable island of Taiwan instead. The Japanese agreed and violently occupied the island. And I do mean violently. After all, the Japanese are not known for really doing things any other way. You see, at the time, the island's population still contained a large number of non-Chinese Aboriginal tribesmen who had lived there for tens of thousands of years. They mostly lived in the mountainous east of the island and did not take well to the heavy-handed nature of Japanese occupation. The Japanese responded to this native resistance, as they often do, with genocide. This is why today, in Taiwan, the Aboriginals make up less than 2% of the population. This means that Taiwan actually has a higher percentage of Han Chinese than mainland China does. For the record, mainland China is only 91% Han Chinese, whereas Taiwan is 98%. Now, because the Manchu Qing never attempted to integrate the islanders, the Han Chinese population of Taiwan had no loyalty to the Qing dynasty of China. They saw themselves as a people apart and gave little resistance to Japanese occupation. This meant that the Japanese, in turn, weren't given any excuse to genocide the Han Chinese population along with the Aboriginals. In fact, the colonial occupation of Taiwan turned into one of the more softer occupations in the rapidly expanding Japanese empire. This softness, for the lack of a better word, goes some way to explaining why modern Taiwanese aren't as anti-Japanese as the Koreans or mainland Chinese are. Those peoples were subjugated to a far more violent occupation, even if it didn't last quite as long as it did for Taiwan. Now, while Taiwan was occupied the longest among Japan's modern colonies, it still wasn't that long. Not even a whole generation, really. After all, the Japanese Empire itself only lasted about 50 years. With Japan's surrender in 1945, Taiwan was returned to China, the Republic of China, as in the non-communist version of China at the time. Of course, we all know what happened next. The Republic of China, despite having all the material advantages and massive US military support, promptly lost a civil war to the People's Republic of China in 1949. The remnants of the ROC retreated to the island of Taiwan and set up a rump state there. You see now what I mean when I said that losing civil wars on the mainland and retreating to Taiwan is kind of a theme in Taiwan's history. For my American viewers who have trouble conceptualizing history outside of an American lens, this would be like if, after losing the Civil War, the Confederacy retreated to Cuba and set up a rump Confederate States of America rather than just, surrendering to the Union. And that is how we ended up with two political entities both claiming to be quote unquote China. It really is just an unfinished Chinese civil war, and not the annexation of a non Chinese sovereign state, as Western media likes to frame it as. To this day, Taiwan still refers to itself as the quote unquote Republic of China, not the Republic of Taiwan. That is what it says on their passports, on their legal documents, on everything. In fact, the only times when the word Taiwan is used in Taiwan is when referring to the province of Taiwan. Fun fact, the Republic of China actually holds on to two Chinese provinces. One is Taiwan, obviously, and the other is Fujian. And that's because it still occupies two little islands on the coast of Fujian, those islands being Kinmen and Matsu. This means that the province of Fujian is technically split between the ROC and the PRC, the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China. Now we come to the question of international recognition. When the PRC was first founded in 1949, only the Soviet Union and its satellite states recognized the PRC as the one and true quote-unquote China. This is important because China has a permanent seat on the UN Security Council and thus veto power on that council. Therefore, only one of the two Chinas can claim that seat. Beyond the Soviet sphere of influence, other countries also started recognizing the PRC over the ROC as the true quote-unquote China. One of these early adopters was Pakistan, who became the first Islamic country to recognize the PRC all the way back in 1951. This is one of the reasons why these two countries to this day have enjoyed very friendly relations. The so-called free world, aka the American Empire and its friends and vassals, continued to insist that the rump government on the island of Taiwan was the true China, and the giant nation ruling over 99% of China's landmass was actually an imposter. And this is where Henry Kissinger comes into the picture in 1971. Kissinger recognized that the US could give the PRC something it really wanted, which was UN recognition, in exchange for something that the US really wanted, which was for the PRC to take the American side against the USSR in the Cold War. Needless to say, this is a super sweet deal for the Americans. All they had to do was give something of purely symbolic value to China in exchange for kneecapping their greatest rival in a very material way. Kissinger was essentially selling China a fake gold medallion for real gold. Nevertheless, the PRC jumped on the deal, and by 1979, the US and all its friends and vassals had switched the recognition from the ROC on Taiwan to the PRC on the Chinese mainland. As of 2025, only 11 out of the 193 countries in the UN still recognize the Republic of China, and nearly all of them are microstates that Taiwan bribes every year to maintain that recognition. Now, China, the PRC, loves to trot out this fact of UN recognition whenever it discusses Taiwan. Beijing sees this as its legal trump card. And from a purely de jure perspective, it is a trump card. Taiwan, the Republic of China, in the eyes of the UN and nearly all its members, is not a sovereign country, but a part of the PRC. In practice, though, this lack of legal recognition has barely hindered Taiwan at all. Taiwan still trades with nearly every country on Earth, and it still has pseudo-embassies in countries that aren't firmly pro-China. The whole thing really is just Kabuki Theater. Now, with specific regards to the United States, the situation is even more absurd. Like the UN, the US does not officially recognize Taiwan or the Republic of China as sovereign states. This was laid out in the Shanghai Communique signed between the two countries in 1972. But there are two major caveats to this story. One, nowadays, the United States insists that it did not recognize China's claim to Taiwan, but only to the fact that China claims Taiwan. This is like saying, I don't necessarily agree with what you said, but I agree that you said it, or a agree to disagree type situation. Two, despite no longer recognizing Taiwan or the Republic of China, the US passed a law in 1979 called the Taiwan Relations Act that gives itself the authority to sell weapons to and defend the political entity that it no longer recognizes. All this is to say that the Shanghai Communique has no practical value whatsoever. It is just the United States having its cake and eating it too. I mean, it's just lying, basically. And yet more evidence that treaties with the United States aren't worth the paper that they're written on. Now, on the island itself, the issue of independence has evolved dramatically over the years. One thing you understand about Taiwan after 1949 is that there is a sharp division between those Chinese who had already lived on the island before 1949 and those who came after the Republic of China lost the Civil War. In Taiwan, the native Chinese are called 本省人, or local provincials in English, and the post-1949 crowd are called 外省人, meaning external provincials. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to refer to them as locals and expats. Now, the locals have always outnumbered the expats, but the expats have always had more political and economic power because they were part of the ruling Republic of China regime and were also much wealthier to begin with, having come from the highest strata of Chinese society at the time. Politically speaking, the key distinction between the two classes is that the locals have no allegiance to any mainland Chinese government, whether that be the Qing Empire that put them under quarantine centuries ago, or the Republic of China that had put them under martial law for 40 years, or the People's Republic of China, that is now about to take over their little island. This isn't to say that the locals no longer self-identify as Chinese. Up until the 2000s, the education system in Taiwan strongly indoctrinated the idea that all Taiwanese are Chinese and made Chinese cultural identity a legal mandate. If anyone claimed that they weren't Chinese, or even worse, advocated for the independence from China, then they were going to go to jail, at the very least. It was only with the election of Chen Shui-bian, a pro-independence, locally born president in 2000, that cultural identity in Taiwan began to shift rather dramatically. Now, a quarter of a century later, the majority opinion in Taiwan is that they, as a people, are not Chinese, at least not entirely. Obviously, this opinion is still far more prevalent among the locals than the expats, but, 3 generations after the big 1949 migration, the lines between the two are quite blurred at this point. So, if any of you are still listening, and going by my YouTube analytics, that should be about 40 to 50% of you, then you should start seeing how Taiwan's current situation is entirely a product of its history. The fact that a slim majority of the ethnic Chinese population on the island no longer see themselves as Chinese is simply a product of the fact that they have been ghosted by the Qing Empire for 300 years, then ruled by Japan for 50 years, before being politically separated from mainland China for almost 80 years. In fact, there's never actually been a time in which Taiwan was a normal province of China. It's always been in a politically awkward situation. But its history as a technical Chinese province inhabited by 98% ethnic Chinese also means that it can't actually be allowed to become independent by any self-respecting Chinese government. Allowing independence would undermine the legitimacy of any Chinese government, whether it's the People's Republic of China or the Republic of China, or even the Qing Empire if it still existed. You see, a country's unity rests on one of two pillars, either a shared ethnicity or a shared set of laws and values. The vast majority of the countries on this planet rely on shared ethnicity, especially the countries of the Old World. Only those countries formed through colonialism base their nationalism on a shared set of laws and principles. Being Chinese means you're ethnically Chinese. Being American means that you think everyone should own a gun and be allowed to shitpost on Twitter. So, if the Chinese government, any Chinese government, allows an island of 23 million ethnic Chinese to live outside of China as an independent state, then they're effectively admitting to their own illegitimacy. It'd be like if Washington, D.C. only controlled half the country. How could it then claim to be the true government of the United States? This is the core of the issue around Taiwan. And it is the primary reason why mainland China, the People's Republic of China, wants to reintegrate the island of Taiwan. Only through reunification with the 23 million ethnic Chinese can the government in Beijing truly claim to be the one and only legitimate government of the Chinese people, the Chinese nation, and perhaps most importantly, Chinese civilization. After all, China is uniquely among nations a civilizational state. It's actually difficult for me to explain to non-Chinese just how important of an issue this is for the Chinese people, especially those who were raised in mainland China, and even for some of those who were raised in Taiwan prior to the 2000s. Among these folks, the support of Taiwanese reunification is as close to 100% as you can possibly be. Even famous Chinese dissidents, like the guy who won the Nobel Prize while under house arrest, Liu Xiaobo, and also the leaders of the Tiananmen Square protests now living in exile in the US, all of these people still support Taiwanese reunification, regardless of whether or not China is a democracy at the time. I mean, I can genuinely say with great confidence that I have never met a China-born Chinese who doesn't want reunification in one form or another. And I strongly suspect that the same is true for you, the viewer. I mean, feel free to comment if you actually do know some mainlander who doesn't support reunification. That'd be like the political opinion equivalent of Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. So, on such a universally supported issue, the Chinese government is left with really no other option. Even if it doesn't achieve reunification, it still needs to appear to make the effort. Western analysts often like to fantasize about some issue that's going to cause the Chinese people to overthrow their government, and they never touch on the one issue that actually fits the bill, which is this one. What I mean is that if one day the leadership in Taiwan were to formally declare independence and the leadership in Beijing doesn't immediately start firing missiles, then there would literally be armed insurrection in the streets of every major Chinese city. Even the police and the PLA would revolt at that point. Actually, the PLA would especially revolt. I mean, military coups are rare in Chinese history, but if anything will trigger one in today's China, then this will be it. In other words, the reunification of Taiwan is a non-optional issue for the Communist Party of China. It is the political issue that the party has to resolve in order to fully secure its legitimacy and future. It rises above all other economic, military, and strategic considerations. Nothing is more important. Nothing. And that's why I have no doubt that Xi Jinping is going to resolve the issue one way or another before he leaves office. It is no longer possible for the party to use a lack of military power as an excuse. Everyone in China knows full well that the PLA has the ability to blockade or invade the island outright. They've waited for this for 77 years, and they're tired of waiting. It is a do or die moment for the People's Republic. Now, will this happen in 2027 or maybe even this year? I'm not sure. But when it does happen, I suspect that the resistance on Taiwan will collapse within a matter of days. The Taiwanese will not fight to the last man, the last bullet like the Ukrainians, but will capitulate like the American-backed government in Afghanistan did in 2021. Why do I think this? Is it just Wu Mao hopium? Partially, perhaps. But I have a pretty solid case that I will lay out in my next video in this series. So if you want to see that, like and subscribe. It should drop sometime later this month. And until then, peace.